Hello everyone and welcome back to Fly From Home. It's Easter Catman here with a old channel favourite here in Microsoft Flight Simulator today. It's the Just Flight Pa28 Warrior. Now, those of you who follow this channel may know that I did a video not too long ago where I had a look at these aeroplanes in the sim as they were back then, and came to the conclusion that they'd kind of been left behind a little bit by all the different changes that are done to the flight dynamics and weather and things like that in the simulator. And the result was that they really don't fly anymore as well as they used to. Now, as of the middle of last week, I believe, there was a big update dropped by Just Flight for these aeroplanes, which has modified the flight model, added a bunch of new features, and hopefully brought it back up to the point where they are once again some of the best general aviation add-ons for this simulator that are available right now. So what I'm going to do today is have a look again at these add-ons and see if that is the case or whether there's still work to be done. But before we start actually doing the flying, I'm going to have a look at the new EFB. Now, this thing, for the owners of the Warrior, you guys who actually own it already will know that there is an EFB that comes with this thing where you can mess around with various different options and select lots of different radios. I've got the working title 530, but you can have the PMS on here, you can have this crappy thing, you can have a dual radio setup if you're feeling fancy. I'll leave it on this because this is most similar to how my flying school's Warriors are set up, so it's most familiar for me. The state saving, there's all sorts of failures and things like that can happen to the aircraft. It monitors oil burn, battery discharge, and all that kind of stuff. You can open and close the doors, isn't that handy? And put chocks, tie downs, put the tow bar on, all that kind of fancy stuff. So it's all well and good. It's all very nice. Let's see, pop the door open as well. There we go. And we can even remove and add the wheel fairings. There we go. Look, so the typical flying school aircraft doesn't have wheel fairings. They usually get taken off at some point because the maintenance don't like to mess around with them every time they have to deal with a popped tyre. But let's say this particular version is. This particular aircraft is privately owned and a little bit better looked after than most flying school airplanes, so we'll leave them on for today's flight because I think they look cool. But anyway, all of this stuff you will be familiar with if you own this airplane. However, something that's new, trim sensitivity, so you can adjust the trim sensitivity of the airplane depending on how you use the trimmer. Either maybe you've got a wheel on your yoke, a trim wheel, maybe you've got some thumb switches on the end of your yoke or stick or whatever. Maybe you're using a keyboard. So that allows you to change just how sensitive those bindings are in order to get it to your own preference, which is handy. Now, if I hit the home button here on this iPad, you'll see that, ooh, look at this. There are a whole bunch of new features on here. OFP is a link to SimBrief. So if you put your SimBrief pilot ID in, that's the number that you can get from your SimBrief account details page. You can pop that in there and it will pull the OFP, if you've got any flight plans loaded on that, onto this screen. I don't have anything loaded right now onto my SimBrief, so there's nothing to pull in. We can pull up a map. So we've got looks like an OS map, an Ordnance Survey map. It's not topomap.org. It's not so much a flying chart, so it's more. I've made it die. Oh, there we go, it's back. Yeah, so this is more like an Ordnance Survey map that you would use when you're walking around or something like that, rather than a flying chart, the normal sort of half-mil conical chart that we use for VFR navigation in this country usually. But it's pretty handy, it's good. Like it. Charts, you may recognize the Navigraph logo on this thing. This is a Navigraph integration here, so if we put in, let's say, Leeds, Bradford, and search that up. There we go. So we can bring all of our aircraft charts in there. We can bring the approaches. If you're doing any IFR stuff in this airplane, all very handy. There's a night mode you can put it onto, and you want it full screen or whatever floats your boat, really. So this is your standard sort of Navigraph integration with an EFB. Take notes, PMDG. Aircraft is back to this page here. Notes, so you can write notes there. You can either use your keyboard, or you can actually draw on here. There we go. So, you know, if you want to just doodle very important things on there, then you can do. Checklist. So we've actually got the full aircraft checklist on here. So if you don't like to use the in-game checklists, you can use this one, and you can tick each one as you do them. So very, very handy there, I tend to find. Top of descent calculator. So this is if you want to be really accurate, and if you're flying quite high, you can pop in data from your flight and work out what kind of descent angle you want. 3 degrees is standard, and it will work out when you should start descending, which is pretty cool. And the settings, you can mess around with the different settings on there. So quite a lot of really cool features. It's very nice to have something as capable of that as that in a light aircraft. Might not be the most useful in terms of the sort of flying that you generally do in one of these, but certainly in the Arrows, especially the turbo Arrow, you might be higher, you might be up in the airways, the descent calculator might be really useful for you. So it's always nice to have. It's nice to see that they're bringing more features to the aeroplane. So we'll go back to the map, shall we? Leave it on there. Now, if you don't like this kind of blocking your view outside of the aeroplane, which I am partial to, I really don't like iPad mounts in light aircraft because it just blocks your view outside. If the ones that are on the yoke are fine, and the ones that you have on your knee or whatever, but the ones that are blocking the windscreen in any way, or the windows, I'm not a fan of. Let's get rid of that. There we go. Right, I'll get this thing started up, and we'll take it over to the active runway, and we'll see how it flies. Okay, so we've done our pre-takeoff checks. We're just about to line up. We're on runway 24 today. We've got a fair old crosswind from the left, so we'll have to deal with that. Approach path is looking clear. Start to roll onto the runway. Transponder can go to altitude reporting, set 7,000. Pitot heat can come on. All the lights will come on. Got mixture full rich. Quick blast the carb heat. Make sure we've got no icing, but I mean, Pa28s aren't particularly susceptible to carb icing, and certainly conditions today shouldn't really lead to that kind of thing. So, just my own neuroses more than anything else. Well, as we're coming around the corner, I'll try to set runway heading on the heading bug there. So we've got a DI rather than a HSI, so this thing actually has to be aligned with the compass. So we check compass alignment, should be runway QDM, which is about 235 here at Church Fenton, aka Leeds East. Put controls into wind, and we go full power, and away we go. Airspeed's alive. Whee. A bit lively. Looking for 60 knots. There's 60. Away we go. That was lovely and smooth. Set the trim. Looking for 80 knots. Keep the ball in the middle. Now I've set the aircraft up to maximum takeoff weight, so we should be getting around 600 to 800 feet per minute rate of climb, and that is exactly what we're getting. So it seems the issues with performance that this aeroplane had have been fixed, and it is performing bang on the numbers now. I can already feel the pitch sensitivity that it used to have is gone. I can fly the aeroplane much more smoothly now. It's a right-hand circuit at Leeds East, so we'll have a good look at, and we'll start the turn. So straight away I can feel a big difference. This is feeling much, much better. So we're on the numbers performance-wise. We'll do a quick run around the circuit and depart out via the Neighbour Marina VRP, which is just to the east of the field. And that should give us a good opportunity to test the aeroplane's cruise performance. And you can see the rate of climb going up and down a little bit, but that is mostly because we're just hitting a few little thermals. It's quite a warm day today, so the simulator is quite accurately simulating thermals coming off the farmers' fields around the airfield here. A bit more right pedal, coming onto the downwind, we're calling a high downwind now departing away to the east via the Marina VRP. Passing 1,000 feet, the fuel pump can go off and the landing light can go off as well. So yeah, she's feeling smooth and progressive on the controls, and exactly what I'd expect from a Pa28 really. I don't really fly these that much anymore. It's been quite some time since I did any PPL training, but definitely feels about right. Now, bear in mind that I'm lucky enough to have really quite a nice yoke setup, which I think flatters a lot of aeroplanes in this simulator if you have it set up correctly with the sensitivity set up correctly. But as far as I can tell, this is really nice. This is feeling very pleasant. Feels like the aircraft's got a bit of weight and inertia to it. And of course, it shouldn't have too much because it's a small aeroplane at the end of the day. We'll level off here. Allow it to pick up a bit of speed. And we'll go for cruise RPM setting, which should be about 2350 if I remember rightly. Forgive me if I'm getting the numbers a little bit wrong. Like I said, it's been quite a while since I've flown one of these in real life. That's looking lovely. We're trimmed out and she's just flying pretty much hands off, as long as I can get the trim sorted. A little bit of rudder input, just keep the wings level. So yeah, that's spot on, really good. Now the Pa28s can be a little bit susceptible to getting bashed about by thermals and things like that on rough days. It's got quite long wing for the size and weight of the aircraft, which on the positive side leads to quite good gliding performance, but on the negative side means it's a little bit susceptible to being bashed around. But the winds are fairly light today. Like I said, the only turbulence is just coming from the thermals coming off the fields, so simulator doing a very good job of replicating just a nice gentle chop from that, and the airplane doing a great job of riding it out. Now ideally we're a little bit low for doing stalls or general handling or anything like that, but I think it would be remiss of me if I didn't have a crack at a clean stall and see if she's still got the same excellent stall performance that this aeroplane had when it first came out. So let's set up for it. Let's put the fuel pump on. We've been going for not a great deal of time. We're on right tank. We're going to stay on right tank, I think. And obviously we'd do clearing turns and things like that, and would be a bit higher if we were going to be doing this in real life, but just for the sake of expedience we're just going to crack on with it. So going to pull the power back. I'm not going to touch the carb heat, I'm just going to pitch to maintain altitude. A little bit of nose up trim to help, but nothing below 80. Now what we're expecting is a very benign stall wings level. The airplane just kind of mushing out the sky. There's the stall warner. And yeah, that's it. She's stalled. The nose, you can see, is just nodding down a little bit. She's just mushing earthwards. She'll pick up a bit of speed. The nose will go back up again. Yeah, that's perfect. That is exactly what the real Pa28 does in an unaccelerated, clean stall. So let's recover. Spot on, absolutely spot on. Well done, Just Flight. So, good look out the left-hand side. And let's bring her back round and set up for an approach and landing. Now I know a lot of people who bought this aeroplane are student pilots, and you bought it because you're training in a Pa28 and you wanted something accurate to what you're going to be training in. And I must say, now this thing has been properly fixed, it really is a recommendation from me for anyone who's training in one of these in real life. It certainly is worth a bite. Now, we'll not count our chickens too much. We've got to land the thing, so hopefully the landing performance is still good. But it does seem like they've fixed it. So let's do our pre-joining check. So the fuel pump is on. We'll change to our fullest tank. Radio is set for the join. Mixture set full rich. Altimeter set airfield QNH. Let's double check while we're pressing B. And DI, yeah, looks like it's lined up for the most part. Not done any particularly high energy maneuvers. Starting a gentle descent down to circuit height. I'm just going to join long final. See the runway just over here. So let's do our pre-landing checks. Brakes are pressurised, parking brake is off, undercarriage is fixed, mixture's full rich, mags are on both. Yes. Fuel's on, sufficient, in balance for the most part. Flaps, we're a little far out for flaps just yet. Instruments in the green, carb heat, let's pop the carb heat on. Hatches and harnesses all secure, landing light can come back on. And the speed's below 108. Let's take a stage of flaps. So, certainly with the second stage of flap on this aeroplane, you expect quite a nose down and a bit of a balloon to happen. So I'm looking for that when I pull the second stage out. I love the sounds of this thing. They're so good. If anyone's ever been hanging around a GA airfield, they've heard these things flying around. The sounds on this add-on are really good, really spot on. A little bit fast, about 90 knots. Probably want to be coming down to about 85 now. Coming on to about 2.5 mile final or so. Can help that with the flap, so let's pop this second stage out. We're looking for, well, there is a bit of a balloon, but the nose really should kind of come down a little bit when you select those flaps. That's one of the distinctive features of this aeroplane, so maybe a little bit of work still to do with that, but the balloon is there. The aircraft certainly went up, just didn't pitch down like like perhaps it should do, but it's a small niggle. And coming on to about 1.5 miles final, we're going to go full flat, and there's not that much pitch shift with the final stage. There's just a big increase in drag, which is modelled pretty accurately there. We're passing 300 feet, so the carb heat's going away. Speed's coming back to about 70 knots. And we're getting a bit of crosswind from the left, so I'm going to crab into it. Maybe I'll even be able to get the centre line. Who knows? A little bit of thermal activity, which is absolutely realistic, given the wind directions coming over those trees and things to the left. You inevitably get a little bit of mechanical turbulence. Tarmac's underneath the airplane. I'm going to pull back the power because it's quite a floaty aircraft. Hold the nose back. That'll do. Lovely. See if I can get that tyre screeching thing to happen. There we go, can you hear it? Sounds like Gran Turismo. Love it. So there you go, the Just Flight Pa28 161 Warrior 2, absolutely back on the recommended list. If you are a student pilot and you want a Microsoft Flight Simulator add-on to help you train, this is definitely recommended. And if you are a simulator pilot who wants a typical light GA training or touring aeroplane to tootle around the sim in, doing a bit of VFR or IFR stuff, then this is absolutely 100% recommended from me. Back to its best. Okay, here we go again, this time with the PA28R201, the Arrow 3. Now this is still our most viewed video on this channel, so I'd imagine that quite a lot of you are interested to see what I think of this thing now, see if it's still up to what it used to be. So, long file's looking clear. Transponder can go on to op reporting. Pitot heats come in on, and all the lights. Now this is one of the aeroplanes that I have flown the most in my career. I've got, I can't even come up with a figure. I'll put it on the screen. I'll check my logbook, but quite a few hundred hours in these aeroplanes. So I'm reasonably well experienced with these. And when I initially tested this out in the simulator, I was very, very impressed. There we go, full power. It's realistically extremely noisy, just like the real aeroplane is. Controls into wind. Airspeed's alive. Getting power. That's what happens when you take your eyes off the prize a little bit. Airspeed's coming up now. We're centralising the controls. We'll keep us 65. There's 65. Back on the yoke, nice and heavy in pitch, but not overly twitchy or sensitive. And yeah, just like the Warrior, the handling has been transformed back to really what it used to be. We'll climb at 83. We've got insufficient runway remaining. Touch the brakes. Gears coming up. Allow it to accelerate to 90. We'll clear out to the right. Start a turn. Go 25, 25. I can see the engine instruments, which are very helpfully positioned under the yoke. That's not Just Flight's fault, by the way. It's just how the people at Piper designed it. Yeah, this feels absolutely spot on. Now the Arrow I usually fly is an Arrow 2, which is slightly different to this one in that it has a shorter wing, so it's slightly more sluggish in its handling, slightly less susceptible to turbulence and things like that. We're passing 1,000 feet, so fuel pump can go, the landing light can go. Now I'm going to shove the throttle and prop full forward and pitch for 90 as accurately as I can. We should be getting 800 feet per minute at this weight, and we're getting about 900, 1,000, but 1,000, but certainly within the window of variance for one of these airplanes. You can see it's fluctuating up and down a little bit with the thermals, as the Warrior was as well. But yeah, that's pretty much spot on. I'm going to go back to 25, 25 now. And continue the climb back out towards the VRP. You can see I've fitted the GNS 750, GTN 750, sorry. I'll level up at 2,000, I suppose. I'm going to leave 25, 25 and just allow it to accelerate. We should be getting between 130 and 140 knots. Arrow 3s are usually a little bit slower than the 2s, so probably expect something more along the lines of 130 knots, but a well-maintained one might be able to make 140. See a little bit of turbulence and bumping the airplane around, but nothing beyond what you'd expect in real life. You can see the speeds coming up nicely. We can set the fuel flow back to 12 gallons an hour now. We are progressively accelerating towards 140 knots by the looks of things. So she's going to hit 140, which is what I might expect out of an Arrow if I was being reasonably optimistic. So that's perfectly accurate. And just like the Warrior, it's lovely to fly, very stable. Sim seems to have decided that a little bit more turbulence was necessary. I've reloaded, obviously, with this aeroplane, so getting a little bit more bumped around, but certainly wouldn't be surprised if I was getting bumped around like this in real life on a day like this. So same story as before. Let's go fuel pump on. Let's go fuel flow full forward. Let's just go straight into a stall. Pull the throttle all the way back to idle. That's the gear warning horn. You can hear croaking away at us there. I've gone prop full forward. I'm just going to pitch to maintain altitude. And we should expect to have pretty much exactly the same stall characteristics in this aeroplane as we saw in the Warrior. Good chunk of trim to help out, because obviously we've got a lot more speed to wash off than we had in the Warrior, so there's going to be a much bigger trim change. You can hear the buffet. There's the stall warner. Yeah, there we go. There's the typical Pa28 nodding donkey. The nose is just going to nod down, we'll gain speed, and then it'll come back up again. Yeah, there we go. So let's recover. Excellent, so stall performance is pretty much spot on. Now I think it goes without saying, but the same EFB stuff that was on the Warrior is available in this airplane as well, so do not fear, all of that stuff is still on it. That disused airfield just there. It's getting a little bit twilighty in the simulator, as it is in real life. At the moment, you can see that haze occurring as the sun sets, reduces the visibility a bit. Right, I'm going to set a lower power setting now. I'm going to go for about 21 inches of manifold pressure. I'm going to bring the RPM back to about 2300. I'll leave the mixture where it is, full rich. I'll leave the fuel pump on. We're going to change fuel tanks. Altimeters, just double check that's still correct. HSI is still set up to runway heading. I'm going to spin the heading bug around. And again, we'll set up for long final. So normally once everything's shaken out, I'd expect about 120 knots from this power setting, and we are getting down there a little bit at a time. I'm going to pull the power back a little bit more now to about 18 inches, still 2300 RPM, keeping the RPM low for noise abatement. Always want to keep the speeds down relatively low for joining an uncontrolled general aviation airfield. Most general aviation aircraft fly at about between 80 and 100 knots around the circuit, so we certainly don't want to be charging in at 140. That's one of the considerations GA pilots generally have to make when you transition from a simple type like the Pa28s Warrior onto a complex type like this one, which has retractable landing gear, constant speed propeller, and a fair bit more performance. So let's do our pre-landing check. So brakes are pressurized, parking brake is off. Undercarriage, speed below 127, gear select down. We're down 3 green. Mixture's full rich, mags are on both. Fuel is on sufficient and on the fullest tank. Flaps, speed below, not quite. Let's bring the speed back a bit more. Speed below 108, flaps select 1. Speed's coming back nicely now. It's below 108, we can go flaps 2. Now there's the balloon. There we go. So that's a little bit more realistic than the Warriors was, because there was a bit of a pitch change there. And you would expect the Arrow to be a little bit more benign when you bring that second stage of flaps in, because it's heavier. So although it has the same wing as the Warrior, there's a lot more weight behind it, so it's less affected by selecting the flap. So we're back on the sort of normal glide performance. We're going to go third stage of flaps now, bring the drag flap in, keeping the speed as about 80, slightly higher approach speed for a heavier aeroplane. Reds, blues, 3 greens. So that's mixture full forward, prop full forward, 3 green lights showing. That's the final check that you do. And make sure our landing light's on. So I'm aiming for the numbers here, not the touchdown markers, so that's why it looks like I'm a little bit low. Letting the speed bleed off back towards about 75 now as we approach the tarmac. The Arrow is much less floaty than the Warrior, so I'm going to pull the power back a bit later. And we'll go idle there, and kick straight. There we go. Cool. So the Arrow hits all the performance numbers it should do, and handles like an Arrow again. So yeah, back to being 100% a recommendation from me. Now the interesting thing is the black square analog Bonanza that came out not long ago is kind of a rival for this now, because it's a reasonably similar aeroplane. It's bigger and heavier and higher performance, but when you compare it to something like the Turbo Arrow, reasonably same sort of ballpark aeroplane, and certainly price-wise, the two are fairly similar. This is a bit more expensive, but of course you are getting a 100% new aeroplane. So certainly something for you to take into consideration. So if you are in the market for a complex retractable landing gear, constant speed propeller touring aeroplane for Microsoft Flight Simulator, either for training purposes or because you just like the look of it, I can 100% recommend this aeroplane again. It's back to being one of the best GA aeroplanes in the sim, I'd say.
Echo Golf Charlie Mike Traffic Piper Golf Oscar Bravo Alpha Kilo taking off runway 24 north departure.
And finally we are here in the Turbo Arrow. Now this one is the Arrow for people who want a bit more performance with their PA28 at high altitude. And a bit more complexity, a bit more chance to blow the engine up. So we're all set up for takeoff here. So I'm going to put the parking brakes on. That's very, it's not very good practice. Right, hold the brakes. I'm going to start ramping the power up. Now, if you remember from my first video, the key thing with turbo arrows is not to exceed the maximum boost pressure on takeoff or go around or touch and goes. So I'm going to push up to about 38 inches. I'm going to release the brakes there. I'm going to steer down the runway, and as we're going down the runway and we start to pick up speed and that ram effect starts to occur, controls into wind, I'm going to start slowly squeaking the power forward a tiny bit towards the red line, but not exceeding it. And there we go, that's pretty much takeoff power there. So away we go. Pitch to 79 initially. Insufficient runway touch the brakes, gear coming up. And we're accelerating towards 97. And the key thing with this aeroplane is managing temperatures. So we're keeping a close eye on the oil temp down here. So we should be getting about 1100 feet per minute rate of climb, which we are. So it's hitting the climb performance numbers, which is always good to see. Just going to run through the climb checklist because I'm not as familiar with this with the turbo as I am with other types of Arrow. Been a while since I flew one of these in real life, so mixture's rich, yeah. Props 57, yeah. Manifold pressure do not exceed 41, yeah. Okay, fair enough. 104 knots. Fuel pump can go off past 1,000 feet now, so landing light can go as well. We'll go for a cruise climb now. So mixture's full rich. Prop is going to come back to 2450 and 33 inches. So let's pull back to 33 inches. And so we'll go 2450 on that. Now what I'm going to do is going to try to get a bit of altitude and show how this airplane performs at height, because that's really the whole point of this airplane. So settle her down into a cruise climb, and I'll see you at about 10,000 feet. Now, one of the key things to remember about this airplane as you climb up to higher altitudes with it is that it is not a typical turbocharged aircraft which will not require any input on the throttle at all. This is a very basic fixed wastegate turbocharger. So essentially, as you're climbing in this airplane, it's exactly the same as climbing in a normally aspirated airplane, in that your manifold pressure will progressively decrease as you climb, and you have to walk the throttle forward bit by bit. And when you hit the critical altitude, which in this plane I believe is 12,000 feet, you will run out of throttle travel, and then effectively you're back to being a normally aspirated aeroplane. So don't be put off by the fact that you can see the manifold pressure dropping all the time as you climb. That is what it's supposed to do. Okay, we've just leveled off at 10,000 feet. I'll line the heading up, and we can have a go with the crappy autopilot. So heading, and heading mode's on, autopilot's on. There we go. Now, one thing to remember about the autopilots of the Pa28 series aeroplanes, at least the default one that came with the aeroplane when it was new, is that it is only a single axis autopilot, and that is, you can only control roll. Can't control pitch, it doesn't do anything with the rudder. So whether you climb or descend is completely down to how well you've got the aircraft trimmed out. All it can do is roll the wings to try to keep the heading bugs centered. Or, I mean, it can follow a nav track, so it is capable of that, but very, very basic system. Right, so throttle max of 75%. Well, I'd say 33 inches is about that. Propeller RPM as required, so we can pull this back very slightly to give us a slightly quieter cabin. Mixture lean for altitude, so you can see the fuel flow there. Now, that's interesting. You can see as I'm bringing the mixture back, the fuel flow is actually going up. Now that, to me, would say that there is no mixture simulation as there is in things like the Bonanza, Turbo Bonanza, the Turbo Baron, which I'll be reviewing soon on this channel, and the 414. Now they all have a piece of script coded into them, which makes it so as they climb, you don't have to do anything with the mixture. It just effectively remains at sea level pressure inside the engine because of the turbocharger. So you don't have to do anything on the mixture side of things to lean out. Now, the fact that that's going up as I'm leaning out suggests to me that that isn't properly simulated in here. I mean, nor was it ever, but there are examples now in Microsoft Flight Simulator of aeroplanes that have that properly modeled, and perhaps it's time for Just Flight to get on that and try to develop a system for this aeroplane. Now, that said, it's not a huge loss in this thing because the critical altitude is only 12,000 feet anyway, so from 12,000 feet upwards, you would be having to lean the aeroplane out as it climbed anyway. So it's kind of not a huge thing, but it is a huge thing if you're really picky and finicky, as I am, and as I'm sure a lot of you are. So that's something with the Turbo Arrow. It's a fantastic, very accurately depicted aeroplane. All of the performance numbers hit where they should do, but it doesn't have a mixture compensating script added to it yet. So that's certainly the next thing for Just Flight to do with this aeroplane. So hopefully they will work on that and get one developed, because there is a precedent for it now in the sim. So there's certainly a way to do it. And in fact, Black Square do work pretty closely with Just Flight. They're their main distributor, I believe. So maybe give the Black Square guys a call and ask how they did it. But here we are. We'll see, we're cruising at 140 indicators, but the wind's pretty much straight across here, and we're getting almost 170 ground speed, which is going to be around about 170 true. I could use the little thing here to work it out, but I'm dumb and lazy, so I'm not going to bother. But that shows that it is pretty much hitting the book figures for cruise as well, so that's spot on. You can see 170 knots in the cruise is very quick for a little single-engine light aircraft like this. It's not quite as fast as the Turbo Bonanza, which is an unbelievably fast airplane. It's going to be doing about 200 knots at this altitude, but certainly it's quick. So if you do want to cover more distance at a higher altitude, this is the airplane for you. Sadly, of course, no anti-icing on these airplanes, so if you are taking them up into the airways on a VAT sim flight, for example, be aware of icing, as you would have to be in the real thing, of course. Now, one thing to note when you're descending in this thing, you've got to be really aware of temperatures. So you don't want to pull the power back so much that you allow the oil temperature to get too cold. So we'll pull back to about there. Let's see what the descent checklist is. Power as desired, mixture lean for altitude, elevator trim, altimeter settings, check. We're going to, for old time's sake, we're going to land at Doncaster. So there we go. That's set to there. So we are going to lean a little bit more to keep the exhaust gas temperature up, which should keep a bit of heat in the engine. Let's see, 11095. Set the CDI to ILS at Doncaster. Let's do an ILS. Not done an instrument approach in a while. I wonder if the Doncaster plates are still on here. Stand by. Oh, they are. Okay. So let's do a runway 20 ILS to land. Not that we need to today, because obviously the weather is absolutely beautiful, but just shows showing off the kind of situation that you might want to find yourself in with this aeroplane. It's a more of an IFR aeroplane than the other two. So now, of course, we do need to wash all this height off. So we're gonna have to go out far enough to be able to do that. So climbing or descending with the autopilot is just a matter of setting the trim to pitch the nose to whatever rate of descent you want. Nothing too fancy. Keep an eye on your oil temperatures as you're coming down. As I said, very important. If the oil gets too cold, you then going to throttle back up as you level off. Then there's a good chance you're going to damage the engine, damage the turbocharger, all the expensive stuff inside the engine. If I remember rightly, topper drops to 2.5 here. Yes, it is. So, got quite a way to go. That descent planner sure does come in handy with this aeroplane, I believe. Humber Bridge seems to have grown a second crossing somehow. That's interesting. City of Hull over there. Big dockyard. We've got Trent Falls here, we've got the River Humber and the River Trent, which branches off it down to the south that way. We have a Brough airfield, which interestingly on here is still denoted as an active airfield. It's actually disused in real life. Hit B and make sure we've got Q and H set. See how the aeroplane's rate of descent goes up in a turn. So you just have to add a little back pressure if you want to keep the rate of descent about the same. That's exactly what you have to do in the real thing. I've only ever flown one Arrow that had a working autopilot. Most of the time they break and the owners don't bother replacing them. Well, certainly in flying school aeroplanes anyway. Let's check our DME. Set up correctly, there we go. So we've got that idented. That we would have to get an audio ident for, so I would have to go there and get the DME. But because I've not got the headphone simulation on, I don't believe we're going to get any beeps and boops from that, so let's just assume that we have idented it. I'd pick up an ATIS if there was one. So we're all idented. 338 for the ADF, that's the Foxtrot November Yankee NDB. Looks like we're out of range, maybe. No, there we go. So that is giving us a signal. That's handy. Briefing. So it's an ILS runway 20 Doncaster. Radio frequencies we don't care about. Nav frequencies all set, checks and idented. Final approach course of 1980 set. Top of drop is going to be 7.6 miles at 2.5. So that's our glide slope integrity check. The decision altitude is going to be 226 plus, so that's 230 plus 50 feet, so 270, 280, sorry. So decision altitude is 280, but I suspect we're going to see the runway a long time before then. Let's see how close we are. We can use the relative bearing of the ADF to tell us how close we are to lining up with the ILS. Let's see, we're not too far away now, so I'm going to start cutting in towards it. So it's 3,500 feet, so 1,000 to go. Okay, back to this. Missed approach is straight ahead to 2,500, and then a left turn back to the beacon, or as directed by ATC. It's a 3-degree glide slope, no notes to effect, nothing there. The weather's perfect, so there's no approach ban enforced. Any questions? I'm assuming no questions. And checks, brakes, pressurized, undercarriage is keep it where it is. Mixture we're going to leave where it is for now because we need that temperature. Mags are on both. Fuel's on. Fuel pump it's on. We're going to change tanks. Not off. Jesus Christ. And it's sufficient for go around. Flaps not yet. Instruments in the green. Carpeet we don't have. Hatches and harnesses all secure. And the landing light can go on. So maybe we can change this to nav and it'll intercept the localizer for us. Let's see. Oh, that's 2.5. So manually just raising the nose to prevent from busting our platform altitude here. And now we've leveled off. I'm going to allow the speed to start to back off as well. And as the speed comes back, I can start to push the mixture forward. Less cooling effect from the air. Air-cooled engine, of course, in this aeroplane. It's a Continental engine, as opposed to the Lycomings that are in the rest of the Pa28 series. But it's still a 4-cylinder, horizontally opposed engine, so pretty similar. So I've just put an OBS line on the GPS so we can cheat there. So we'll know how far we've got to go till we intercept the final approach track. And you can see we're pretty close now, so I'm expecting the line to come any second. Now, I can't remember whether you'd have to turn heading mode off for the nav to work. It's been many a year since I've flown an Arrow with a working autopilot, so I'll have to bear with my ignorance, unfortunately. Oh, there we go. So she's now turning in of her own volition to intercept the localizer, which is handy. Now, the wind is saying we've got a bit of a tailwind component, but it's not particularly strong. We can, I think 11 knots is the max tailwind for one of these aeroplanes. It's well within that, so we'll accept the tailwind. Slightly higher rate of descent is going to be caused by that. Pull the power back a little bit more. See, the speed is down to about 120. I'm going to pull the prop back to 2300 now for noise abatement. Looking for 7.6 for the top of drop. Looking for our glide slope indicator to start coming in. Why that 7.6 nautical miles is important is because that's our glide slope integrity check. So we should be on the glide slope at that distance from 2,500 feet, and that will show that we have intercepted the actual glide slope and not what's called a side lobe, which is a false signal that you can get at certain ranges from the ILS. Okay, I'm going to go full rich now. Glide's alive, coming up to half scale, so speed below 127, gear select down. Bring the power back. Just trying to get the speed back a bit so we can get some flap in. Speed below 108, flaps 1. And as we're about to intercept the glide, we'll go flaps 2. So I'm setting the throttle to maintain 100 knots for the initial part of the approach. Ground speed is 91, so target rate descent is 450 feet per minute. I assume we've been cleared to land because we've got our landing light on. So I'm leaving the autopilot on to handle the localizer, and I'm just pitching and trimming to remain on the glide and get the target rate of descent. And setting the throttle to maintain 100 knots. So it's not quite as lazy as having an approach mode on your autopilot, but it's not far off. Maybe we should put some panel lights on, it's getting a little bit dark. There we go. Probably not the time to be doing this where you're trying to fly an instrument approach, but ADHD is one hell of a drug. So at some point we obviously have to transition from this 100 knots 3-degree glide slope onto our normal sort of landing profile at about 85 knots. So we'll do that at about 2 miles, and we'll select the third stage of flaps when we do that to drag the airplane up. But until then we'll continue at 100 knots. See, the inherent stability of the Arrow is makes it quite an easy aeroplane to fly down in ILS. I'm going to pop the autopilot off now and just hand fly it. We can all laugh at how bad I am, despite this being my day job. I'll get the excuses out early though. I don't usually fly the Arrow IFR. Most of the stuff I do in the Arrow is VFR stuff for CPL, Commercial Pilot's License Training. Coming up to 2 miles, we've got 2.8 to run. Getting a little bit firmly as we get lower, so I'm having to push through that, which is exactly what happens in real life. It catches people out quite a lot as you get towards the ground. Often end up being pushed above the glide slope by a bit of a freeze. I think the game is probably just loading my fancy Doncaster scenery in. Give it a minute. Okay, there's 2 miles. So let's go reds, blues and greens. Speed below 108, flaps full. Keep the throttle pretty much where it is. In fact, I'm going to have to bring it back a little bit. A little bit of crosswind from the right, so a bit of crab to correct for that. You can see the speed's just drifting down towards 85 now, and we'll push the throttle up to catch that. Mostly ignoring the glide slope and localizer now, I'm just looking out the window. Bit bumpy as we come over the trees here. That's accurate because generally when the wind was from the right at Doncaster on runway 20, you used to get a lot of turbulence over the top of those hangars. So, Sim doing a pretty great job of modelling that. Intentionally or unintentionally, I'll leave that up to you. There we go. And we're down. Can we make it off by Charlie? Of course we can. Okay, landing lights, pitot heat, strobes, transponder, flaps coming up. Now, those of you with the Bonanza might be thinking, oh, where's the whistly turbo noise in this airplane? It should have a whistle if it's a turbo aircraft. Well, this is actually realistic. You can't hear the turbo at all in the Turbo Arrow. Which is why when I reviewed the Bonanza, I was questioning whether whether that sound really is as loud as that in real life. Yeah, the sounds in this thing pretty great. Okay, so let's I don't know if we've got an avionics switch or not. I don't think we have actually. Don't know if you can turn it off with that. No? Oh well. It is what it is. Okay, so all the lights, yeah, pitot heat's off, that can go off, that can go off. Quick mag check. Idle, idle. Engine stop, beacon goes off. Get rid of the lovely panel lights now, very nice. There we go. For all of you who always complain I never check the panel lights, there you go. They work. They look really good. But the panels, obviously, in these airplanes are absolutely incredible. They're probably the best ones in the whole simulator. So nothing to worry about there. Let's pop the door open. There we go. Right. So the Turbo Arrow is just the same as the regular Arrow and the PA28. The changes to the flight model that have been done have pretty much fixed it. It's no longer overly sensitive. It's no longer twitchy. It feels like a PA28 again. It feels like it's got inertial. It feels like it has the right rate of roll and pitch and all the rest of the sort of things. Certainly with my control setup, like I said, I'm quite lucky to have a good yoke and a good, well, reasonably good set of pedals and all the rest of it. But certainly from my point of view, this handles very much like the real aeroplane again, and is very much worth the money. Now, is it worth the money over the top of something like the Bonanza or the Baron or the 4-4? I mean, the 4-4 and the Cessna 310 are a lot more expensive than this, so you'd expect them to be a bit... I'd hesitate to say better, but they are a bit more in-depth. That said, you know, these have fully modelled circuit breakers and all sorts of stuff like that, you know, systems failures and things like that. If you abuse the engine will fail on you and that sort of stuff. So these are very in-depth aeroplanes. But for example, the mixture, the fact that there's no mixture script to handle the mixture control in the Turbo Arrow is a little bit, does kind of get on my nerves a little bit. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the regular Arrow or the Warrior. They're both completely spot on to how they should be in real life. But this one is still missing a little bit if it wants to be 100% study level. But the other two, yeah, you can certainly make that bold statement and say they are study level aeroplanes. Is it worth it over and atop the other aircraft in their price bracket? Yeah, I would say it is. It's up to your preference whether you want something like the Bonanza, which is a bigger, heavier, faster aeroplane capable of higher altitudes, or you want something a little bit more common, a little bit more fuel efficient. Maybe you want a PA28 because you're training in one, or you fly one regularly, or you own one. And I would certainly recommend these aircraft in that scenario. They are absolutely spot on. They are still, or they are once again, sorry, one of the best GA aeroplanes available in this simulator, and hopefully they will stay that way from now on. So, thank you very much if you stuck with me to the end of the video. I certainly hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please don't hesitate to leave a like and perhaps even subscribe to the channel. And I would really appreciate that, as would all the other people who work with me on this channel and bringing you all this content. Please join us on Discord, leave a message on Facebook, whatever you want to do, social media stuff, we're on there. And hopefully I will see you next time. Take care, bye-bye. Okay, just a little extra note. Given that it is Easter weekend, there is an Easter sale on the Just Flight website. So if you want any of these cool add-ons here, any of the black square stuff, or any of the Arrows or Warriors, or the Warrior, sorry, they are on sale right now. So as you can see, this is all in GBP because, surprise, surprise, I'm in the UK. So if you want the Warrior, it's $23.99 down from $29.99. And the same story for the two Arrows. So great opportunity if you do want to buy these aircraft for Microsoft Flight Simulator. They are on offer at the moment, and now they've had this big update, I would certainly recommend them 100%.